Welcome, everybody, to our little interview. It's my privilege to be speaking to John van der Laar, who was ordained as a Methodist minister and who's working now in the very flexible environment we all found ourselves in of online church, and particularly through his website, Sacredize, and I'm hoping he'll say a little bit more about that. But before I rattle on too long, John, won't you tell us a little bit about yourself and about Sacredize and even Evo Faith?
Thanks, George. Yeah, I was Methodist minister for most of my adult life. In 2019, for various reasons, felt that my time in the Methodist Church as a minister had come to an end. I still work as music director part-time for Westview Methodist Church in Centurion. But the focus of my work for over 20 years now has been the Sacredize website that you mentioned, sacredize.com, which is really a site that provides training and resources focused particularly at small progressive churches. So I'm thinking of churches where ministers are overworked, where they're looking for resources so that they can create worship that is both theologically deep, but also inspiring for the people that share in their worship. And while I keep talking about worship, it also focuses on the full life of the church, because of course worship is part of that context, and I believe is the fountainhead from which the church's life flows. So that's Sacredize in a nutshell. In 2019, end of 2019, I started a website called evofaith.com. Started with a website, and then on Ash Wednesday 2020, launched an online community called the Evo Faith Tribe, which has really been my experiment, if you like, into online community and providing online spiritual practice guides for people through the medium of video. As well as helping people to explore faith in new ways. The whole point of Evo Faith is it's designed for people who have either broken up with church or their relationship with the church would be labeled it's complicated. And so it's a place where questions that aren't always comfortable to be asked or explored within a church environment, people can do that at Evo Faith. And that's kind of who I am. I'm married. I have been married to Debbie for nearly 36 years, and I have 2 adult sons.
Great, fantastic. It's interesting you talk about an online community. I came in contact with such a thought for the first time about 10 years ago when I was visiting the Church of Scotland. The then moderator of the church was starting a community. When he retired, in fact, he started a community called Sanctuary. And it was an online community. And it had this, now I'm going to use a word hybrid, which I know that you're not necessarily 100% happy with, but it had this sort of hybrid existence in that mostly it would meet online, but sometimes they would gather in various places, like they'd take over a coffee shop, or they'd go together to a Christian music festival or something. Do you think such a church can exist, a church that has a life in the in-person world and at the same time a life in the virtual environment?
Not only do I think it can exist, I think that what we've learned from COVID is that such a church must exist. I started probably about 15 years ago asking the question, what does the church look like in this internet-enabled, interconnected world that we now live in? The reality is what we do in church hasn't changed much in hundreds of years. The style of music maybe has changed, but essentially what we do remains the same. And for people who are not able to be in this particular geographic location at this particular time in the week, the church has nothing pretty much to offer you. Yes, we might have small groups and whatever, but if you can't get to our church service on Sunday at 11 a.m. or whatever the time is, well then, sorry for you. But people live in the rest of the world in an on-demand existence where time really doesn't matter. It's no longer a barrier to entry, and geography no longer limits us. People are living in this world that transcends time and geography, and the church hasn't moved into that world yet. And I believe, to use your word hybrid, and I'll explain maybe just now why it's an okay term, but I think it's limited, and I'll explain why I say that just now. For me, the church has to move more and more. If it's going to survive, it has to move. And more than that, obviously, if it's going to fulfill its mission. Then we have to become part of what's happening in the rest of the world, which is this globally connected, on-demand life and world that people are living in.
Great. We'll say a little bit about that hybrid word, and then I'll come back to a question coming out of what you've just said.
Sure. So I think hybrid has been a helpful word for people, but I have a couple of challenges in my thinking of it. First of all, when you talk about hybrid, you're talking about two things generally. You know, this thing and this thing come together and they form a new thing.
Yes.
I think we're dealing with something far more than just two realities coming together. I'll explain that in a moment. The other challenge I have is, and I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years, particularly with the course that I developed called The New Church for a New World, helping people navigate this new pandemic-altered world. I've spent a lot of time researching what people are saying, what's working, what data is coming out. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And one of the things I've noticed is that even people who are kind of the leading voices around where the church is going, when they talk about online church, what they really mean is online worship. When they talk about hybrid church, what they really mean is hybrid worship. And a lot of the rest of the life of the church gets left out. And so that's one of the challenges I have. If we're going to move online, we're going to talk about church, online or hybrid church, we actually need to be talking about the full range of the church's life and mission. The second problem I have with the hybrid church concept is that most of the people are still using the offline church as the primary frame of reference. So we work with a church that is in a physical space, in a physical building that operates within a certain time zone, and we extrapolate from that to the online world. And what we do online is really, even if it may be designed specifically for an online community, it is still built on the values and the systems of an offline church. We're not rethinking the online world for a specific online community. Everything is referenced by the offline church. And I think initially during COVID, we needed to do that because our offline church couldn't get to the building. So we were largely catering to our offline members, but in an online space. But I think in the next 4 or 5 years, this is just my guess, I mean, we can't know for sure. In the next 4 to 5 years, we're going to find the online world of spirituality of church is going to become its own thing, and it's going to operate very differently from what the offline church that we used to looks like. And so if we're going to talk about navigating that world, the idea of this hybrid, I think, limits our thinking, and we need to break free of that. So for me, the term I like to use is that the church needs to become a multi-manifestational community. And you know, if we had more time, I would go into more detail on that. But yeah.
Okay. Well, look, time is running pretty fast, and let me ask you something because it relates to frustration I had. At some point, I confronted the notion that there were some people who were replacing the worship service on a Sunday, or at least the experience of church in general, with a 15-minute, sort of video sermon. And I think you alluded to that. Church is so much more than either the worship service or listening to a sermon. The fellowship, the service opportunities, the learning in other ways, and so on. Yeah. How do we access an online community in a responsible manner, not replacing it with a consumer-tailored little video clip?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I could spend an hour just responding to that question. Let me try and do it in a couple of minutes. I think, first of all, we need to realize that a consumer mentality of church has been existing in our offline church for decades. So that's already a problem in the church. It's being exacerbated by what's happening online. I also want to say that all the issues we're seeing as a result of COVID existed before COVID happened. The decline in church membership, the lack of loyalty to particular church denominations, all of those things, the burnout of clergy, for example, all of these things existed before COVID. COVID just accelerated the rate of change there and brought those things into a much sharper focus for us. Yes. And that helps us in a way because we can extrapolate from that. We know a bit of what's happening. We have some data from that. And we can look at how COVID has accelerated that. And that does give us some ability to predict what's going to happen in a very unpredictable future. So all predictions have to be held lightly, but it does help us to get some idea of where we need to head as we're going forward. So having said that, to go to your question, how do we navigate this? For me, first of all, we need to look at the entire range of the church's life, and you alluded to that. So how do we, yes, do worship online, but how do we pastor people effectively online? How do we disciple people effectively online? What does it mean when we begin to do mission and evangelism and outreach in an online space, or in what I would call a multi-manifestational space, where it's both online and offline in all sorts of different environments and different configurations? How do we finance the church? And I want to just suggest that the online space provides wonderful opportunities for church financing that we haven't had before. And so there's good news in all of this. But when we begin to think about the full range of the church's life and mission, I think that begins to address some of your question. And then the other thing is to kind of look at what's happening, things like TED Talks, what's happening on YouTube, what are people doing that are building effective communities, not necessarily faith communities, but there are lots of people building effective communities online. What can we learn from them? And the big thing that we're finding out across the board is it's all about relationship. And we know that in the church. But when we build those relationships, you can do that very effectively in an online space. And when we make that the focus, not numbers, not money, not the latest technology, building relationship with people, that's when we begin to encounter true community online.
Fantastic. John, just one last thing, because our time has almost run out. Would you say something about the program that you put together, A New Church for a New World, so that those who are interested in this topic can take it a bit further?
Yeah, thank you. It's a 6-week course. I ran it live in October and November last year. Have had wonderful responses to the course. I then packaged it as a downloadable course, made it available in December, and had further people take it up there. It's not on my site at the moment, but I am going to put the old version of it online actually this week, so it will be available again. But I'm busy streamlining it and updating it, and there'll be a new version. But anybody who has done the course will get free access to that new version. A New Church for a New World is essentially about exactly what we're saying, looking at the full range of the church's life. So I start with looking at what is this new world? How do we come to grips with the new world, this pandemic-altered world? What is different from before the pandemic? What has just continued through? What is the state of the church? What does the world need from us? We look at that in session 1. Then we look at the different aspects of the church's life. So how do we do worship in this new multi-manifestational church? How do we disciple people, pastor people, do mission and outreach? And how do we do funding and sustainability? It's not just about the money, but it's also about preventing clergy burnout of volunteers. How do we make the church sustainable in all ways that we can? And so the course covers all of those things in 6 weeks. There's lots of work to do in the course. So we spend a lot of time talking through how you can apply these principles to your community and giving you some practical stuff you can implement. The idea is that it's not just something that you do and then pack away, but it actually is a resource that I would hope churches would use, perhaps over the course of a year, with leaders. And once, anybody who does the course, you are freely available to make, freely allowed to make the videos available to all your leadership so that everybody can go through it with you together. And the whole idea is to start conversations with your leadership and then begin to implement just 1 or 2 things until you've got those sorted out, then another 1 or 2, little by little, to help you transition into this new world that we're living in and a new way of doing church in that world.
John, thank you so very much for making the time to speak with us. And we really hope that your ministry is an enabling ministry for all of us to handle and to enjoy this new world that God is presenting to us. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks, George. It's been a privilege to be with you. Thank you.
Ryan, welcome to the Inspire Conference for 2022. It's wonderful having you. Just as for those who don't know you, you have been a minister in the Benoni area for over 25 years as a local minister and pastor, and then serving the Church of Scotland now for the past 7 years in a rural parish. And so welcome, and thank you for taking the time just to be with us and to share some information around what we're calling hybrid church or online church. And so thank you for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation, Stuart.
One of the questions around the theory aspect of how do you understand hybrid church or online ministry, and perhaps you'd like to share with us some thoughts around that.
I think it's a complicated answer and it's a simple answer. I think complicated answer will get into the space of a church that offers a mixed economy of different things. So, but I think in our context and in terms of your conference, it would simply be a church that uses technology to take what they're doing inside a building and get it beyond the building. And so it will be a church that's able to say we have online ministry as part of our ministry and mission. And I think it's important that it's seen in terms of ministry and mission. There are different forms of hybrid church in that context, and using that as a definition, the use of technology. I don't know. I think I mean, there must be many models, but I'm aware of probably 4. And the one is a congregation that uses technology to offer beyond the church that which they're doing in the church. So typical would be a live stream. There's a model where a congregation will offer what they're doing in the congregation online in the hope of bringing people that engage them online into the church. And so it's seen as probably a mechanism for church growth. Then there's a hybrid version that says we provide online content that is not simply a mirror of what we're doing in the church, but maybe more uniquely crafted, tailored to a particular group of people that they're trying to reach in terms of ministry and mission. And probably people that won't necessarily come to church, haven't been to church, but will engage in a short, brief online provision. And then there's those who have moved entirely online and have literally left the building. And I'm not convinced of using online ministry as a church growth mechanism, as a hybrid tool. I'm moving, and it's always evolution of thinking. I'm moving towards providing specific online content and not just a mirror of what's happening in the building. But that would be a hybrid church.
Your context is very interesting because you spend a lot of time in Scotland and also in South Africa. And while in South Africa, you're serving in the UPCSA, but also you have your parishes in plural in Scotland as well. And so maybe you can share some of your context around this online ministry and content that you're working with.
Okay, well, I think it started off before COVID, where we, being in a rural context, having distances between churches, having a number of elderly people that are homebound, and so different places that we would like to get to. So we started looking at this, started recording, offering videos, and then COVID happened. And with the lockdown in COVID, we moved to online ministry. That's all we could do. And so the model that we used was not to provide, and again, I'm only speaking as a practitioner, not an expert, and it's just what we felt was right. The model that we provided was a brief 15-minute reflection and worship where there'd be a song, opportunity to sing, opportunity to pray, reading and a reflection. And that's what we provided for the duration. We also provided an online prayer and reflection 1-hour service on a Sunday evening, which incidentally still continues. We still do it that way, primarily because we have people that have joined that in the process from beyond Scotland, and so we've maintained that. But in this unique thing at the moment where I am traveling to South Africa quite a lot, we're trying to develop and almost future-proof our context, our parish context, where we are, and it's based a bit on the multi-cycling idea, where I provide online content, and while I was away and when I'll be away again this year, I do preaching from South Africa. So there's a person who leads the service and is the kind of worship pastor for the service. And when it comes to the sermon, it's me on the screen. and technology allows us to do that. And so we do that. But in terms of current practice, we are post-COVID moved to the prayer evening, but also live streaming our services. I'm not convinced about live streaming services. I think we're probably under opportunities and challenges getting into that a bit. So we're changing what we're doing. We're in the process of developing the platform. And so we will live stream funerals. We do live stream weddings. Those are new opportunities. We live stream our services at the moment, but you don't get the viewership that you might think you want to get. I think unless you're one of the mega churches with a massive reputation and following, it's going to always be less than you think it's going to be. But that's okay, because you're providing ministry opportunity. But very few people, unless their circumstances is that they're homebound or for some reason not able to get to church, and they normally would be at church, would sit through the whole hour or hour and 15 minutes. So whilst we're doing that, we're also currently developing an app, which will be launched in July, which will still provide a live stream, but will also provide the kind of stuff we were doing during COVID. So 15-minute engagement and ministry. And there will be various things that you can really easily access through your smartphone. So that's what we're doing at the moment.
The app that you're developing, is that something that is unique to the congregations that you're serving, or is that something that will be available to anyone who might be interested in tapping into that app?
Yeah, no, the app will be, it's available through the App Store, so anybody can have it, which again allows for moving beyond your parish. You start having a parish without boundaries now, which makes it a bit of a bun fight. There's so much available on a Sunday. I had one of my congregation members say to me when she followed my sermon, I was minister number 5 for her Sunday, and I just thought it couldn't be either really bored or desperate. But so there is a lot out there, and it might not be what you're hoping or expect it to be, but doesn't make it less valuable.
So going to opportunities and then the challenges you've experienced in the space, and also contextualizing the South African context that we find ourselves in. Any thoughts around that?
Well, I think for the opportunities are limitless. They, we always say people say, oh, we struggle with change. Well, COVID has proved that that's nonsense. Everybody changed during COVID. And I think the temptation for some is to go back to what was. And I think as a minister leading a church, there's so much energy and the mindset for change that's happening right now. You've got to grab it. So there are massive opportunities. I think the opportunity to go beyond your parish is exciting. The opportunity to engage a community where there are people that maybe are curious about the Christian faith or curious about spirituality. The academics can fight about the distinctions between that, but I think there's just an opportunity to connect with people that you simply would never see or connect with as a local minister riding around your parish. So that's massively positive. I'm not entirely sure of the benefit to or the mindset that says we do this in order to get people to come join our congregation. There is success in it. There are people that do it. I've had people join our church because they first met us online, but that's incomparable compared to the number of people that then engage us online and that's where they meet us. So there are lots of opportunity. There's also opportunities and it's all about content provision, to offer unique content that's unique to your ministry specifically as a person or your church's ministry. I think it also opens the door to remind ministers that we serve a local church, but we are called to minister. and and this just gives us other spaces to be minister in, and that's just exciting. So the opportunities is a long list, and I'm sure during your conference there will be loads of ideas about that. I think the challenges is an equally long list, and living where I live, my bandwidth is 100 megabytes, so it's just there's a lot of accessible infrastructure, and I think it would be I think in the South African context you have to speak about the digital divide. The challenge of is this a ministry that churches that can afford it can do, and if you can't afford it, it's not something you will ever do. Is this a ministry that the wider church acknowledges ought to be happening and therefore needs to find a way to enable that? But we have to recognize the digital divide, and it isn't, there is inequality, and that's an issue in ministry. I think a suitable IT platform for doing online ministry. From the one end of the spectrum, it could be a smartphone, and all you need is a strong enough signal and enough data. But there's also an issue about the cost of data, which is very expensive in South Africa. So you can have a smartphone, or you can spend as much money as you can on a very sophisticated, almost like a television studio setup, to provide content and live stream. I think one of the challenges is, as someone who's an absolute techno freak, I think be careful it doesn't feed that which is in you that just desires the best camera, the best computer, and we're still going to be stewards. Excuse the pun, Stuart, but we're still going to be stewards of the resources that we've been trusted with, to do it in a reasonable, effective, and efficient way. I think the other challenge, and I've said it earlier, it might not be what you think it's going to be. I think there's this myth about starting online ministry and you'll have 1,000 viewers. So you can have your own, YouTube channel and branded and all that kind of stuff. That's very, very difficult. You got to have a particular kind of content. So, are you a well-known musician or a well-known preacher? And this is one of the social media issues that have come up, is that everybody else looks better than you. And it's got to avoid all that kind of stuff that's happening nowadays. You got to be just confident in what you're offering and how you're offering it, and just trust God, and just keep on doing that faithfully. And it does get to the cliche of the one person saved, it's worth it.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. And I think we'll end off with that: trust in God, knowing that another ministry opportunity in the space we're in. So thank you, Brian. If people want to connect with you, ask more questions, the platforms, how would they be able to do that?
Probably the best way would be to begin that with an email, and we can take it from there.
Brian, thank you for your input. It's wonderful, a lot of insights, and then we'll have a conversation around that shortly. Thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you, Stuart. God bless.
And